Hello everyone, how are you? I hope that you will be very fine and I am also very fine. Today I am going to discuss friction and then after I will discuss about causes of friction. After that I will discuss about types of friction and then after I will discuss about laws of friction. First of all, I am going to define friction. What is friction? What what do you mean by friction? What do you mean by friction? What is friction? Define friction all ourselves. First of all, I am going to define friction. Friction is the force acting between any two surfaces of contact which always opposes the tendency of their relative motion. You can also say it in other words, the force acting between any two surfaces of contact which always opposes the tendency of relative motion of surfaces of contact is called friction force. The force acting between the force acting between any two surfaces of contact which always opposes the tendency of their relative motion. The tendency of their relative motion. The tendency of their relative motion. Their relative motion is called friction force. Is called friction force. Is called friction force. Friction force is the force which always opposes the relative motion of surfaces of contact. Let us consider an example. Let us consider an example of two blocks which are moving in same direction. With velocities 10 meter per second and 15 meter per second. This block is A and this block is B. Both are moving in same direction. We have to find the friction force exerted by A on B and exerted by B on A. Now we are going to find friction force exerted by A on B. Friction force exerted by A on B. First of all, we find the relative velocity of B with respect to A. What will be the relative velocity of B with respect to A? This will be relative velocity of B with respect to A. This will be 5 meter per second towards right. Okay, right? Therefore, friction force acting on the block B will be in backward direction, means leftward direction, and because relative velocity of B with respect to A is in forward direction, friction force always opposes the relative motion of surfaces of contact Therefore, friction force will act in leftward direction because relative velocity of block B with respect to A is in rightward direction. Now we are going to find friction force acting on the block A. Friction force acting on the block A. First of all, we find relative velocity of A with respect to B. This will be equal to 5 meter per second towards left. Therefore, friction force will act on the block A in forward direction. Here we observe that both are equal in magnitude and opposite in direction, which follows Newton's first law of motion. Newton's first law of motion. According to Newton's first law, every action and reaction has equal in magnitude and opposite in direction. Therefore, friction force acts on the block A due to B will be in forward direction, that is in rightward direction, and the friction force exerted on B due to A will be in leftward direction, because friction force always opposes the tendency of relative motion between the surfaces of contact. Okay, now we are going to take another example of two blocks which are moving in opposite directions. Which are moving in opposite directions. Let us consider the velocity of block A is 10 meter per second in rightward direction, and velocity of block B is 5 meter per second in leftward direction. We have to find friction acting between the blocks. First of all, I am going to find friction acting on the block A with respect to, friction force acting on the block A due to B. First of all, we find relative velocity of A with respect to B. What will be the relative velocity? Relative velocity will be 15 meter per second and direction will be forward direction, मतलब rightward direction, means rightward direction. Now friction force opposes this relative motion, therefore friction force will act in leftward direction on the block A due to B. Now we are going to find friction force acting on the block B due to A. For finding friction force acting on B due to A, first of all we find relative velocity of V with respect to A. What will be relative velocity of B with respect to A? This will be equal to 15 meter per second. Direction will be leftward. Therefore, friction force opposes the tendency of relative motion. Therefore, friction force will act in rightward direction on the block B due to A. Right? Therefore, we can say that friction force always opposes the tendency of relative motion of surfaces of contact. Now we are going to take another example in which one surface is at rest with respect to ground and other surface of contact is moving with respect to ground. Let us consider a block kept on a table. This is table and this is block. Table is rest with respect to the ground, but this block is moving with 10 meters per second with respect to the ground. The surfaces of block and the table are rough. Therefore, we have to find friction force acting between these two bodies. Friction force, first of all, I am going to find friction acting on the block due to the table will be in backward direction, because relative velocity of block with respect to table will be 10 meters per second towards right. Therefore, friction force will act on the block in leftward direction. Okay. Now I am going to find friction force acting on the table due to the block. First of all, we find relative velocity of table with respect to block. This will be equal to 10 meters per second in leftward direction. Therefore, friction force acting on the table due to the block will be in rightward direction. Okay. This friction force acts on the table, but this friction force acts on the block. Okay. Next, I am going to discuss causes of friction. What are the causes of friction? Causes of friction. Friction arises due to interlocking of irregularities between the surfaces of contact. Let us consider one surface is in contact with other surface. These point of contacts, the number of point of contacts larger the number of point of contacts, larger the number of point of contacts, greater will be friction. As the number of contact points increases, friction also increases. Now we are going to make a smooth. The surface. As a smoothness increases, first friction decreases and then after friction will increase due to dominating of intermolecular forces. Due to intermolecular forces, friction increases. Friction increases. Therefore, I can say that first friction decreases and then after friction increases. If we make a smooth the surface. We make a smooth the surface. A smoothness increases, first friction decreases and then increases due to dominating of intermolecular forces. Therefore, causes of friction will be interlocking of irregularities. Causes of friction will be interlocking of irregularities. Due to a smoothing, irregularity decreases and friction also decreases. And then friction increases due to dominating of intermolecular forces. I can also say that causes of friction due to cold welds. Due to cold welds in contact points under high pressure. Now we are going to discuss types of friction. Friction is mainly divided into two parts. First is static friction and second one is kinetic friction, also called as dynamic friction or sliding friction. First one is static friction and second one is kinetic friction. A static means at rest. If block is at rest, let us consider one example. This is table and this is a block. Surfaces of block and table are earth. Let us consider I apply a force of 1 Newton, but the block does not slide. This means that net external force acting on the block will be equal to 0. This 1 Newton force balances by friction. This force will be friction force net force acting on this block will be equal to 0. Now we are going to apply another force of 2 Newton. But block does not slide. This means that block has tendency to move in rightward direction. Therefore, friction opposes the tendency of their relative motion. Therefore, friction force will act in this direction, which opposes applied force. Friction force is also equal to 2 Newton. Both forces are balanced to each other. Therefore, I can say that if block does not slide, then the force acting between the surfaces will be a static friction. If the blocks start sliding, then the force of friction acting between the surfaces of contact will be kinetic friction, also called as sliding friction or dynamic friction. Right? If we take another value of applied force, let this force is 4 Newton. This force is 4 Newton. The block is in limiting equilibrium in this case. Limiting equilibrium means the block is just at the point of sliding, but it does not slide. In this case, a static friction will be 4 Newton. But this static friction is the maximum value of a static friction. This maximum value of a static friction is called limiting friction. This maximum value of a static friction is called limiting friction. Okay? If you apply a force more than 4 Newton, then the block starts moving. And during the motion, the force of friction acting between the surfaces of contact will be kinetic friction, which is also called as dynamic friction or sliding friction. Right? Next, I will discuss laws of friction in next class. Okay?